crisscrossing all back and forth. Every organ in his body was destroyed. Portions of his brain were liquefied. The most frightening thing for me was when I walked in and Alex couldn't recognize me. He didn't know who I was. Right before he did lapse into a coma, his last words to me were, "Don't cry, Mommy." And his last gesture to his father, when his father was trying to coax him to go to sleep, is he just blew him a kiss. He was comforting us. I went from one day having a very healthy, very vibrant little 6-year-old to 4 days later he was dead.
It's been 11 years, and obviously it doesn't ever get easy. Your little guy, Alex, was clearly born with a big heart.
Alex' first thought was always for others rather than himself. He would regularly come home, "How was your day, Mommy?" And he just had a heart as big as gold.
He helped people out. I mean, he wanted to be the paramedic. You could probably tell more stories about an unusually empathetic boy.
Alex's thoughts, as I said, were always for other people. I mean, when he was in preschool, he was all of 3 years old, and there was a little Down syndrome child. And while the other kids were out playing, he'd be there with the little Down syndrome child while they were trying to teach him to play. My mother's friend had Parkinson's disease, and he was there one day, and he saw my mother's friend's hands just shaking. So he put his hands next to hers and held her, and he says, "I love you." And then when he was in kindergarten, the teacher was called out of the room, his teacher, and came back in crying because she had just been told that her favorite aunt had died. And he went up to her and hugged her and said, "Don't cry, Miss Cody. She's in heaven now." So he was always for everyone else.
Special kid. Alex, too, was a victim of E. coli. How did you find out?
We actually found out a couple weeks after he had died, when it was reported on the news that there were several other children that were in the hospital suffering from the same problem.
Do you know where the contamination came from?
In our case, we're very sure that it came from those frozen ground beef patties that you buy in the grocery store in the box. And that was pretty much a staple of our diet at the time. We regularly brought them out, threw them on the backyard grill, and cooked them up as a family. It was fast, easy, and everyone liked it.
Who thinks that you could go to the supermarket and bring something home that would be fatal to a little? Nobody does. But that's why we're here. You were inspired by this terrible loss to do what you can to change the system. What have you done?
I've become very active, become the president of Stop Safe Tables Our Priority, which frankly it's an organization of foodborne illness victims our mission is to prevent these illnesses and deaths through policy advocacy, and we give victims assistance. Stop was a lifeline for me. It gave me a reason to go on living. It gave me a venue to channel my grief, my anger, and to keep Alex alive and work on his behalf.
Does it not make you angry, though, to see that 11 years later, little Savannah was nearly lost to the same thing?
It makes me very, very angry that this is still going on. I'm so very, very grateful that Savannah is still here and didn't have the outcome that Alex did. But it shouldn't be happening 11 years later. There are things that can and should be done by industry and by government to help prevent these tragedies.
What you need to protect yourself and your family next.
I want Alex to be remembered as a really wonderful person who suffered a very unnecessary death. That's the reason I do what I do today. I don't ever want Alex to be forgotten. He was just too wonderful of a child.
Close.
How safe is the food we eat every day? Nancy's 6-year-old son Alex passed away 11 years ago after eating meat containing E. coli bacteria. And Christy's daughter, Savannah, was just 5 when her kidneys shut down after also eating beef contaminated by E. coli. But as you see, she survived. But she doesn't eat meat anymore.
No, she will eat some kinds of chicken, but when it comes to beef, she won't touch it.
Even though she doesn't remember the experience.
She said it just tastes bad and it makes her feel sick to her stomach. She just won't touch it. She doesn't even come into the kitchen when I'm cooking it.
But the rest of the family, you go ahead and eat it. But
we live in the Midwest in a farm-type community, and when she first got sick, neighbors came over with fresh, ground, beautiful hamburger and said, please don't let this turn you off from hamburger, because it's a staple in our community. I mean, it's if you go to someone's house to eat, it's very likely there's going to be a hamburger product on the table.
After what happened to you, do you feel guilty? Do you feel to blame, either of you?
It took me at least a year of getting up at night and scouring my house at 3 in the morning and coming down and putting all of the pots and pans in the dishwasher and putting it on high. I was fanatic. I was frantic. I couldn't sleep. It was horrible.
Nancy, we were talking about if you could snap your fingers and change rules or regulations, what you would do. Well, the same thing, if you could change habits in the typical American kitchen, what would you have us do?
I'd get a mindset, first of all, of everyone getting a respect for food. That it might be something that, and to practice safe food handling techniques, such as using separate cutting boards for meat and their other food products, such as using paper towels to clean up where you can wipe up a spill and throw it away, such as using meat thermometers, very, very, very important. Just taking the extra time to wash between fixing platters and just being conscious that you need to practice safe food handling techniques.
One idea was getting everything you need for a recipe out and on the kitchen counter before you cook, and I would not have thought of this.
Well, that's that mindset again, because there it is that you've got the chicken in front of you, and now you want the seasoning, and now you're touching your cabinet handle and pulling it open and grabbing the seasonings. So it just makes sense to kind of have all that stuff there beforehand, and then after you finish using the seasonings, wash them off.
Well, people are thinking, well, don't you think she might be being a little hysterical about this?
I don't think so. It takes in the case of E. coli that killed Alex and sickened Christy's daughter. It can take a single microbe that can just continue to grow in the body that can lead to terribly deathly illnesses and death. So it's very important to treat this with the respect it deserves.
Caroline, as you watch, I know you must make speeches all over the country about such things as we've been talking about. Is there anything to add to the list?
I think the number one rule for preventing foodborne illnesses and many others is for consumers to wash their hands. They also need to not only treat raw food with respect, as Nancy said, they have to treat leftovers with respect. Get the food back in the refrigerator quickly, no more than 2 hours after you've served it. And another thing, Nancy talked about paper towels. Your sponges can have lots of germs in them. Every day, just stick them in the dishwasher or on a pot on the stove and boil them. That'll get rid of a lot of germs in your kitchen.
Nothing could be easier than the dishwasher if you can do it. Yeah. What risks do we face when we go out to eat? The results of the first nationwide look at the cleanliness of family restaurants. Next.
At a TGI Fridays in New Orleans, a customer saw a rodent run across the dining room. An inspector wrote the restaurant had been rat-infested for months.
When we go out to eat, most of us spend our time focusing on the menus in front of us, but What's happening behind closed doors in the kitchen? How does that affect us? My former Dateline colleague, Lee Thompson, is here. She's the show's chief consumer correspondent, and she knows all. You went looking in a major survey of restaurants for critical violations. What does that mean?
Well, before we do that, I just want to say on behalf of all of us at Dateline how excited we are about your new show and how we miss you so much. We miss you.
Thank you, Lee.
But getting on with the show here, we did go looking for critical violations. Critical violations are it's just really simple. Those are the things that make you sick. And we have known, I've covered, unfortunately, so many stories through the years of stories that you've already heard about on this program. We knew that people got sick at restaurants, and we wanted to find out just how clean restaurants are. We went out and we looked at 1,000 different restaurants, the top 10 family chains, and frankly, I was shocked.
Let's take a look at what Lee uncovered.
Dateline took our hidden cameras along when we dined at the nation's largest casual and family dining chains. We found many clean, well-run restaurants. But we also found some dirty, unappetizing scenes, like this IHOP. A drain in the dining room got plugged with grease and had to be unplugged while people were trying to eat lunch. At a TGI Fridays in New Orleans, a customer saw a rodent run across the dining room. An inspector wrote the restaurant had been rat-infested for months. At an Outback in Suffern, New York, a diner found a dead fly in his salad. For these unlucky diners, a bad meal led to much more than a night of discomfort. Their foodborne illness was serious and severe. They had salmonella poisoning.
I ended up in the fetal position, just shaking uncontrollably.
Matt and Ann Miller almost had to cancel their wedding.
I remember just laying in bed, like, hoping that the pain would go away because it was just so severe.
They all ate at this Chili's in Vernon Hills, Illinois during a 3-day period in June 2003. What they didn't know was the water heater had broken down, so there was no hot water for employees to clean the tables, wash the dishes, or even wash their hands. But Chili's kept on serving meals. 300 people were sickened. 149 of them were confirmed victims of salmonella poisoning. A health department investigation found the bacteria spread like wildfire when sick employees handled food after going to the bathroom.
So we literally ate food that was contaminated with human feces.
Basically, what was the bottom line, Lee?
Well, the bottom line, as far as Chili's was concerned, the company that owns Chili's came in and closed that restaurant down. There were many lawsuits. They were settled, although Chili's said that it didn't really feel that it was its responsibility. But you know, the real bottom line of all of this is that we found 82% of the restaurants we looked at had critical violations. Those things that can make you sick. I heard somebody say, wow.
Yeah.
It was wow for me as well. And many of those, almost half of those, were repeat violations. In other words, a health inspector came in, looked at it, said, clean it up, and it was still there when the health inspector came back.
Richard and Linda are with us today, and they can relate to Lee's reporting. They became ill after eating at a Chi-Chi's restaurant. In a story that made national headlines, more than 600 people became ill with hepatitis A, and 4 people died. So I guess you could say that, Richard and Linda, you were among the lucky ones. Linda, you were sick enough to feel like you had the flu?
I felt like I had the worst flu I ever could imagine, because I've had the body aches, the stabbing pain in the back would just wake you out of sleep. And I would say I don't moan that much, and you would just roll over and moan.
Richard, what were your symptoms? They were far more serious.
Well, my symptoms started out exactly the same as Linda's, but they developed at a much faster pace.
What was happening to you?
I had contacted hepatitis A, but what it had developed